Uh-oh, I lost it.
You're fine, Diane. I'm just started the recording. Diane?
Okay. I got some kind of a message that said this meeting is being recorded, which I've never seen before.
Yeah, it's the new Zoom.
A new permission. So at any rate, hi, everybody. We're going to start our meetings as we usually do with a brief meditation. So it's self-initiation and allow yourself to go where you go when you go. Welcome back. Hard to come back. We are blessed today to have Dr. Walter Semkiw with us. I met him online a few months ago, and we're really happy to do that. I wondered why I didn't get a hold of him sooner, because I've been following reincarnation activities for many years, as I've had many experiences myself about my past lives and the past lives of other people in my family and friends. But I'm really grateful we found you, Walter, and that you're going to join us today. He is a physician, and he grew up here in Illinois and went to school at the University of Illinois and at in both in Champaign and Chicago, and he now lives in San Francisco. So I'm going to let you tell your story so that I don't give it all away beforehand.
Okay.
And really glad to have you, Walter.
Well, mutually, I'm very happy to be here and for the support that you're providing. Because to get this information out, um, it has to kind of come from a grassroots level where people are educated on the enormous amount of evidence of reincarnation that does exist. And, that's why I built the website, because uh, if I was going to discuss all the cases on the website, we'd be here for 3 days. So I put it in on the web, and one thing that'll make this easier, I think, and better is if I share a screen. Well, actually, let me first describe how I got into this. And it was nothing that I ever planned. It all kind of happened accidentally. And the story is that I was doing my occupational medicine residency at the University of Illinois in Chicago. And I had this friend who was a psychic, and she said, I need to go see this trance medium who's working out of a metaphysical bookstore. And it was somewhere in the area of, I think, Harlem, and well, it was in the western suburbs. And at the time, I didn't believe in psychics at all. And I've always been approached things in a skeptical way. And but it was winter in Chicago, and as you know, pretty much you're indoors and not much to do. And so I did it just, because I had nothing else to do. And I thought it might be entertaining, if anything. So, the way the trance medium works is they go into a meditative state, and then they allow spirit beings to speak through them. And later on, I will describe my work with Kevin Ryerson, who's also a trance medium. And I've worked with Kevin for 20 years now, so I have a lot of experience with, trance channeling. But the person I went to in Chicago, this was back in 1984, so quite a while back. This was a trance medium, but somebody different than Kevin. And when the medium went into trance, two spirit guides came through. The first one said that they were the universal guardian given to those who have come into life to make a statement. And they said that I'm here to bring a new way of thinking. Well, I'm like a 20-something resident, and I'm thinking, well, that sounds very grandiose. How am I going to bring a new way of thinking? And the session went on, and then a second spirit guide came through, and that one is the one who gave me much more detailed information. And they told me that I had two past lives, one in the time of Louis XIV and one during the American Revolution. And I thought that's nice. And I went on and asked the really important questions, like, when am I going to find a girlfriend? And then at the end of the session, they said, do you have any questions? And I said, well, can I know who I was in the American Revolution? And they said, the second guide said, look to John Adams and you will see yourself in physical features and personality. And what I thought they meant was that I knew John Adams. And if I researched John Adams, I'd find myself in his circle. I thought that's what they meant. And then the guide said, no, John Adams was a statesman, a representative. And I said, are you saying that I was John Adams? And the guide said, this is truth. Now, at the time, I thought that was totally ridiculous and did nothing about it for 12 years. One interesting thing is in the session, before I got there, and even when I was there, I didn't tell anybody anything about myself. I didn't tell them, that I was a doctor or training, in occupational medicine. Um, but the second spirit guide said, we see you as being a physician, not just in the physical sense, but in a corporate sense. Well, in occupational medicine, there's like 3 different routes you can take. Clinical, where you're seeing patients all day long. You could become a corporate medical director where you work for a big company, or you can go into academia. Well, at the time, I didn't really know what my path would be, but I did ended up being a corporate medical director, just like they said. Um, so I did nothing about this information for 12 years. And, I did become a corporate medical director for Unical 76, the gas stations with the orange balls. And a part of my territory was Hawaii. And so I was on a business trip to Hawaii, and I met with the managers at our facility there. My responsibility was to make sure that all the drivers are healthy enough to haul gasoline. And so I met with some of the drivers, and I met with the managers, and then the head manager said, let's go to lunch, have lunch, and let's meet in the parking lot in 10 minutes. And I happened to be the first one out there. And it was middle of the day in Honolulu. I was standing up, wide awake, and out of the blue, this booming voice inside my head says, "Study the lifetime of atoms." And this was like a thunderbolt. I mean, it was that loud and powerful. And I was kind of shocked by it, but I couldn't deny that it happened. And that finally got me to look into this possibility of being John Adams. And that night, I went to the bookstore in Honolulu and got books on Adams and the Revolution and started to, research. And what happened is that I found that it appeared that people who were in John Adams' lifetime were reincarnated around me. And for instance, I'll show you the pictures later, but my one brother was sort of a very close friend to Adams, and my other brother was actually the brother of Adams, and I'll show you that later. So that's how I got onto this trajectory. And along the way, in addition to studying atoms, I became a scholar basically on reincarnation research. And my first book, which is kind of my personal story, is Return of the Revolutionaries. It was published back in 2003. And then I have more recent books. The one that I promote the most is called Born Again. And that contains what I consider to be the most important reincarnation cases. You'll see on the website, there's tons of cases, but there in the book Born Again, I selected the ones that I think are most key. And then I have another book, Origin of the Soul and the Purpose of Reincarnation, which is actually based on dialogues with a spirit being named Atun Ray, who is channeled through Kevin. And I see there's a book flashing there. That's wonderful. And the way I got in touch with Kevin is once I started on this path of writing the book about my story. I used to do presentations at like Learning Annex. They don't have them anymore, but I would do presentations and people would come to me with their own possible past lives. And the cases that are from Ian Stevenson, they speak for themselves. But for other people, it wasn't so clear. And so I was looking for a psychic who could help me sort out which cases were valid and which were not. And I went through about a dozen psychics until finally somebody said, you should see Kevin Ryerson. And my first session was back in 2001. And I have sessions roughly once a month. And so now, so Kevin channels the spirit being named Atun Ray. And he's like the most amazing being I've ever interacted with. I mean, he is by far the smartest being I have ever worked with. He has an encyclopedic scope of information, which always amazes me. And he has a wonderful personality. He has a great sense of humor. He makes you feel, at home and, relaxed. He tries to make the sessions fun. He knows I tend to be real serious and, got to get this done. And he always jokes around to kind of lighten me up. And if anybody's interested, I think you would really enjoy having a session with Kevin. So anyway, that's kind of how everything started. And I became, pretty much expert on Ian Stevenson's work. And the thing about Ian Stevenson, for anybody who's read them, you'd probably agree, his material is extremely difficult to read. He wrote for academics, not for the average person. And he was obsessed with detail. He was very meticulous. And in order to convey all the facts of a case and show the testimony of witnesses, he would, tell the story in a short narrative, and then he would create tables where in the columns there are the various people who were witness to a child's spontaneous past life memories. And then in the rows, he would say what the child actually said. So you have each witness who corroborated a particular statement, and it's all arranged in a table, which is great in terms of providing very detailed reporting of the case, but it makes the case very difficult to follow, And so what I've done is I've rewritten Stevenson's cases in easy to understand language so that it's available to everybody. Any questions so far? No? Okay. So let me go on. What I'm going to do now is kind of guide you through our website so that you know where you can find the cases later. Does everybody see the website with these rotating images? So the rotating images are just kind of through pictures to describe that we can incarnate in any culture, basically. And when we realize that, people will stop fighting each other. Let's start up here in the upper left-hand side on the tab that says Children's Past Lives. And here I do a summary of the work of Ian Stevenson. Stevenson was a professor of psychiatry at the University of Virginia. He started out as very mainstream into biochemistry and all that. But then he had heard about these children. I should say also, he did child psychiatry. So children were a special interest to him. But he had heard of these children who had spontaneous past life memories. And the fellow who invented the Xerox process, his name was Chester Carleton. And Chester was interested in these children too. And he gave the University of Virginia $1 million to create a chair, especially for Ian Stevenson to do this work. And that's what he did for 40 years. He traveled, excuse me, he traveled around the world studying these young children who had past life memories. And he chose only to choose kids because he reasoned that adults can learn information, and it's more difficult to validate adult cases. But these children would come up with these detailed memories, and let me just kind of tell you the typical Ian Stevenson case. Sorry, I have allergies. As soon as a child can communicate, the child describes a past lifetime, and the child will have will remember the names of their parents, their siblings, other people in the family. They'll remember where they live, the location, the town or city. And basically the child gives enough detailed information that the biologic family can locate the past life family. Because again, the child said where they lived, what town, what the parents' names were. So the the past life parents would go with the child then to this town, and they would make inquiries of, does this story fit any person who's lived here? And they would find, yes, there was this person with the name the child says. And through this, the parents are able to unite the child with their past life family. And upon the initial meeting, the child will identify past life family members by name. They'll know where things are in the house that people only who live there would know. And the child would identify so many characteristics about the past life deceased person that the past life family accepts the child as the reincarnation of their deceased loved one. And Stevenson, by the way, he studied about 2,500 children in all. And out of those kids, about in about 1,500 of these cases, the past life family was identified and the case was validated. So in about 1,000 cases, they weren't able to locate the past life family. But again, in 1,500, they did. What these cases show is that personality traits, personal preferences, habits often persist. I use the analogy to understand reincarnation of going to sleep at night. When you go to sleep at night, you know who you are, and you sleep, you wake up in the morning, and the next morning, you remember who you were the night before. But with reincarnation, you go to sleep, but wake up and you have no memory of who you were before. But in general, your the same person from one lifetime to another, just like you're the same person when you go to sleep and wake up in the morning. Gender, in 90% of Stevenson's cases, gender stays the same. So men come back as men and women as women. Uh, that's 90% of the time. In just 10% of the cases, gender changes. So a man can reincarnate as a woman and vice versa. And what if some of Stevenson's cases where gender change does occur, there can be gender identity issues and even homosexuality. So in this case, what's happening is the person, let's say he's a man, dies and then reincarnates, but as a girl and grows up. But instead of having the mindset of a woman, he maintained the mindset of a man, including being attracted to women. So in these cases, gender change can result in homosexuality. And I think, you know, all these people now in the transgender community, I bet a lot of those people were of the opposite gender in their prior lifetime, and they're maintaining the mindset of their past life gender instead of adapting the mindset of the new gender. Very interesting, huh? And then we also find that people can look the same from lifetime to lifetime. And this is actually a big tool in making past life identifications because, you know, past life memories are subjective. So, you know, there's no way to kind of, you know, confirm a subjective statement. But physical resemblance is objective. And so now we have a objective measure to assess cases. And in what I do in posting cases, I just check that these, what I call principles of reincarnation, are in place. And if it fits, then I will post it on the website. The other thing that we find from Ian Stevenson cases is that people plan lifetimes. And Stevenson has a twin study where he has 31 sets of twins who all remember their past lives as children. And in studying these cases, he found in every instance the twins had strong personal relationships in the past. So, you know, in twin cases, the most common past life relationship was siblings, but there are also cases where people who were twins in the past lifetime reincarnate as twins again, which shows not only that souls plan lifetimes to be with people we've known before and loved before, but it shows how the soul can affect conception. I mean, somehow the soul is implanting itself, you know, in the womb of the mother, and it's doing so consciously, you know. So that again, it kind of makes life seem a lot more logical, I would guess, or I would say, where without understanding reincarnation, life just seems much more random and hard to understand. Ian Stevenson died in 2007, but another academic psychiatrist, Jim Tucker, has taken over for him, and he's continuing this work. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, let me get some water here. Oh, you know what I really miss about Chicago is like Chicago beefs and hot dogs. You know, they don't have them in California. There's one place. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is go to home, back to the home page. And so what I've done is I've organized the website into these principles of reincarnation. So here on the left-hand side where it says case categories, these are all these principles of reincarnation that I just discussed. So these cases show physical resemblance. And when you click on this, this is going to be all the cases that show physical resemblance. Um, and you can go to the most popular. By the way, this fellow, Chuck McMurray, does anybody know him? You know, he has a very fascinating reincarnation case, and he lives in Chicago. So in the future, he might want to talk. Anyway, so the most popular cases are listed: Anne Frank and James Leininger, or you could put oldest or newest. The second thing that we observe in reincarnation cases, I forgot to mention this when going over Ian Stevenson, but Stevenson noted that when somebody was killed in a violent manner by a stabbing or bullet wound, that in the next lifetime there would be a birthmark or scar at the exact same spot where the wound was. And Stevenson went to great depths to research this. You know, many of his cases were actually from Asia and other places where reincarnation is more accepted. But I kind of lost my train of thought. What was I saying? Is there anybody out there?
Birthmarks.
Physical mark.
Yeah. So he traveled all over the world, and he would then even go to the coroner's office in the area to get the autopsy of the past life person, and that's how he was able to associate the birthmarks with past life trauma. In fact, he has a 2,000-page book on birthmarks, and it's in 2 volumes. I have it here somewhere. But, there's very few people who are going to go through a 2,000-page book, and that's another reason why I did the website. Another set of cases that Ian Stevenson noted were xenoglossy cases. Xenoglossy is the phenomenon where the young child can speak a language that they had no opportunity to learn in their current lifetime. So, a child could be born and starts speaking Chinese when their parents are American, and they don't understand anything the child is saying, and they have to get translators, to communicate with the child. But it's considered to be strong evidence of reincarnation because you have to learn a language sometime. And if you didn't learn it in this lifetime, it's reason that you learned it in a past lifetime. And the other thing that's really amazing about xenoglossy cases is they show that the personality is retained intact within the soul. And kind of an interesting let me just find the cases I want to show you. Oh. here we go. I'd mentioned that I started working with Kevin Ryerson and Atun Ray in 2001. And, I asked, and basically my dialogues with Atun Ray are about the more bigger pictures, about, so how many lifetimes do you have, and when does it end? When do you stop having reincarnation? And so my book, Origin, the Soul, and the Purpose of Reincarnation, is my dialogues with Atun Ray. I would ask questions, and then I would provide the answer. Yes, thank you for showing my book. I asked Atun Ray kind of early on, well, what happens to me? What happens to my personality when I die? Does that just get absorbed by my soul and kind of dissipated, or what happens? And Atun Ray told me that actually your personality from this particular Walter lifetime is retained intact within my soul. And he said that I can then have conversations with my own past lives. So if I was John Adams, Atun Ray used the example that when I die, I can have conversations with the John Adams. And it's interesting perspective, but what really kind of freaked me out a little bit is Stevenson has a case that demonstrates this concretely. And this is the case of Sharada, who's the past life personality, and Uttara Hadar, who's the present life personality. And the story is that it involves this woman, Uttara, who was a grounded person. She got a master's degree in administration, and went to work in that capacity, and had a totally normal life until this episode where she had to go into the hospital for some medical issues. And while she was there was a yogi type guy who was teaching patients to do meditation. And so Uttara learned to meditate. And one day, when she was meditating, she went through a drastic personality change. And Uttara was of the Marathi cultural group in India. In India, there are like dozens of languages and different cultural groups. And so Uttara was Marathi, and she only spoke the Marathi language. When Sharada came through, you can think of it as almost like the phenomenon of a trance medium, where just like with Kevin Ryerson, Atun Ray comes through him. In this case, Sharada kind of functioned as a medium, and her past life personality emerged through her. And the past life person was Bengali and only spoke Bengali. And when Sharada would take over Uttara's body, the length of time of the possession, if you will, would be 2 to 3 days and up to 45 days. So for over a month, only Sharada would be present. And because Uttara's family did not speak Bengali, they had to bring in Bengali interpreters to communicate with their daughter. And you can imagine with this kind of a spectacular case, there was a lot of study, and they brought in a Bengali professor to test her language skills in Bengali, and the professor said that she speaks perfect with a natural Bengali accent. And this phenomenon went on for 9 years, and there were multiple validations. Let me just mention that Sharada listed a whole number of relatives and other people, and she said, where she lived in Bengal. And somebody actually went to Bengal and found the family genealogy of the family that she remembered being part of. And through the genealogy, they were able to validate her memories of her relatives. As I mentioned, her language skills were very good. She had a good knowledge of Bengali geography and places, which she did not learn, in her current life. In the Atura lifetime. She had a very strong knowledge of Bengali foods and clothing and manners of dressing, with the the red dot on her scalp. And what's kind of funny is that Sharada hated the Marathi people, and she would put them down. And it's the ironic thing is that she reincarnated into a Marathi family, though Sharada didn't realize it was reincarnation. She just thought she was alive, that she's a normal Bengali woman. And when people said, well, wait a second, are you a spirit? And she said, no, I'm not a spirit, I'm a woman. and anyway, it's kind of my point that when people realize they change religion, they won't be disdainful of the Marathi people. It's a very interesting case, and I would encourage people to take a look at it in more detail because it's really phenomenal. Okay, so going back to our home. Okay, so the next tab is innate talent and prodigies. So in addition to looking the same, we tend to do the same thing from lifetime to lifetime. So artists tend to come back as artists, scientists come back as scientists, and so forth. We're basically the same kind of person from lifetime to lifetime. We have the same kind of interests which we pursue. And so in this tab, there are all the cases that show similar talent. And at this point, maybe I can talk about the Anne Frank case. I'm in the wrong section here. Also, there's a search bar here. There are a lot of cases on the website, and the easiest way to find one is just to put it in this search bar. And here's the Anne Frank case. And to me, this is actually one of the most important cases on the website and in existence. So the story goes, this is a typical Ian Stevenson case, but there was no Ian Stevenson to study Barbara. So most people know that Anne Frank died in the Holocaust in a concentration camp in 1945. She was put there because she was Jewish. And, she's become the most famous victim of the Holocaust because a memoir that she wrote, The Diary of Anne Frank, and it's one of the best read books in all of history, because all over the world, children in schools are taught the story of Anne Frank to learn tolerance. And so Anne Frank died in 1945. 9 years later, Barbara Carlin was born. And just like in typical Ian Stevenson cases, as soon as she learned to speak, she said, "My name's not Barbara, it's Anna Frank, and you're not my parents. My parents are going to come get here. This is not my real home, but my parents are going to come get me and take me back to my real home." And this is totally typical of what kids say in Ian Stevenson's research. Her parents had no idea who Anna Frank was, Anne Frank, because she was born. Barbara was born in Sweden to a Christian family. So here we have a very dramatic example of change of religion. And I make the point that if people knew, the Nazis knew that you could be born Jewish in one lifetime and Christian in another, then the Holocaust could never have happened. And it's kind of the same thing that's going on with the Taliban these days, is they just don't understand how life works. So here I've enlarged the picture, and I met Barbara in the year 2000. She first wrote a book about this in 1996 and started to do presentations in Europe. And actually, Budi Elias, who was the president of the Anne Frank Foundation, heard about her, claiming to be the reincarnation of his cousin. So this is Budi Elias I'm talking about. And Budi and Anne were cousins, and they were playmates. They were very affectionate towards one another. And Budi didn't believe Barbara was Anne, but he wanted to meet her. So he contacted Barbara's publisher and said, "I would like to meet Barbara. Please bring her to my home for dinner, but don't tell her who I am." In other words, don't tell her I'm the president of the Anne Frank Foundation or that I'm Anne Frank's cousin. And so they did that. And so the publisher and Barbara came to the house of Budi Elias. And when they got there, the publisher said to Barbara, "Well, why don't you go ahead and knock on the door?" And Barbara didn't really understand why he wanted her to do that, but he did. And when Barbara and Budi locked gaze, it's like they had instant recognition, and they hugged each other and they started to cry, and they sat together talking for 2 hours. And when Barbara did subsequent presentations, book signing type things, Budi would actually attend and introduce her, and he has supported her being Anne Frank. And in fact, their friendship continued. And whenever Barbara would visit Europe, she would stay with Budi. And when Budi would come to the US, he would stay with her. so again, it's like, these playmates from a past lifetime are kind of back together now. And yeah, so the main important thing is that Booty Elias, who knew Anne, uh, supports that she is the reincarnation of Anne Frank. And actually, I was kind of shocked, but you have to get copyrights to put pictures in books, so I had to get permission from the Anne Frank Foundation to use this picture of Anne Frank. And I wrote to them, and I thought it's highly unlikely they're going to give me permission, because the Anne Frank Foundation is well known to be very aggressive and territorial about anything involving Anne Frank. And so I thought it was a long shot. But I actually got an email from Booty Elias directly, and he gave me permission. And I was like pleasantly shocked. So anyway, and the other part of the story, so I started to notice physical resemblance from lifetime to lifetime based on work of my own case. Remember the whole John Adams thing. So I had been studying atoms and so forth from 1996, and so I already knew about facial features being similar from lifetime to lifetime. Ian Stevenson himself never wrote anything about physical resemblance until 1997. So at about the same time, I was making the same observation, and so I already had on my mind physical resemblance. And when I met Barbara in 2000, I compared the images. I'm the first one who compared the images. In her own book, Barbara never says anything about looking similar to Anne Frank, because the basis of her story is memories, where I've kind of approached it more from an objective kind of view. But anyway, it turned out that Barbara has the same facial features as Anne Frank. It's a pretty dramatic resemblance. And so it shows that somehow the soul influences how we look. And I believe how this works is that the soul projects an energy template into the fetus. And so the fetus, the tissues of the fetus form around this energy template that allows physical resemblance to occur from lifetime to lifetime. This energy template also will allow downloading of information from the soul and from past lives, which explains how we tend to have the same talents and do the same thing from one lifetime to another. So in addition to having Barbara's very convincing story with memories from childhood, she also has the same facial features, which adds to the credibility of this case. Okay. Oh, the other important thing about the Anne Frank lifetime or reincarnation case is the replication of talent. Let me see, I can talk about each case for about half an hour, so it kind of limits cases, but I'll do the best I can. So her parents did not know who Anne Frank was when she first came up with her memories, because the diary of Anne Frank had not yet been published in Sweden or distributed in Sweden. So it was only 9 years, between the time that Anne Frank died and Barbara was born. But at the time Barbara was born, the diary of Anne Frank was not available in Sweden, and she just wasn't that well known at the time. But her parents, not knowing who Anne Frank was, thought she was just making all this stuff up, just fabricating things. And they were concerned enough that they took Barbara to a psychiatrist, to make sure there wasn't something wrong. And Barbara had figured out by this time, she's maybe 4 to 5 years old. She figured out by this time, that anytime she started to talk about her past life, everybody got like really nervous and apprehensive, like what's going on with this kid. And so she learned to not talk about it. And so when she went to see the psychiatrist, she didn't say anything about her past life memories, and she got a clear bill of health. So anyway, during this time between seeing the psychiatrist and being 10 years of age, Barbara really had nobody to talk to about these memories. And again, she had nobody like Ian Stevenson to study her. But things changed when she was 10 years old. And what happened is her parents took her on a vacation touring the various major cities in Europe, including Amsterdam. Well, Anne Frank's story is that the family moved from Germany, which is where they were from, to the Netherlands and Amsterdam. They did that as the Nazis were gaining power. And so they moved to Amsterdam to try to evade the Nazis. And they hid in her father's business attic for 2 years. And they only ate beans and this is when Anne Frank wrote her diary. So you'll see there the diary of a young girl. That's another title. But at the time that when she was 10 years old, the parents, I'm sorry, when she was born, the parents didn't know who Anne Frank was. But by the time she was 10, they knew about Anne Frank because the diary of Anne Frank had been published in Sweden and distributed. And now Anne Frank was getting to be a kind of celebrity figure. So when she was 10, they went on a trip to the European cities, and they came to Amsterdam. And by now, the parents knew who Anne Frank was, and the father wanted to go to the Anne Frank Museum. And he picked up the phone off the hook at the hotel to get a cab to take him there. And Barbara says, "We don't need a cab. It's right near here." And they said, "Well, how could you know? You've never been here before." And she said, "Well, I will show you." And she took her parents by the hand and led them on a 10-minute walk directly to the Anne Frank house, which now had been converted to a museum. And her parents were kind of stunned. How did you find your way here? And it's hard finding your way in Amsterdam, because there's the canals and the buildings look the same and they're curved streets. I went jogging in Amsterdam and couldn't find my hotel. Anyway, so she led them directly to the Anne Frank house. And then they went in upstairs, and they came into the room where Anne slept, and Barbara looked at one wall and pointed to it and said, "Look, Mommy, the pictures of the movie stars are still on the wall." And the mom looked and said, "Barbara, there's nothing on the wall. The wall is bare." And Barbara looked again and saw this was true. She got kind of confused and started to cry. And so the mother said, well, let's ask a tour guide. So they asked one of the tour guides there, who said, yes, well, normally, and she said that, Barbara said on the wall, there are pictures of movie stars. But when the mother looked, there was nothing there. So they asked the tour guide, and the tour guide said, yes, the pictures that Anne Frank had clipped and put on that wall, people were touching them, damaging them, taking them. So we decided to take them down, put them under glass, and we'll put them back up again. So now, her parents saw that she found the way to the house on her own, strictly by past life memories. I call that geographic memory. And then she knew that these pictures were supposed to be on the wall that actually had been taken down. And her parents realized, how could she possibly know that? And came to the conclusion that these weren't fantasies that Barbara was having about Anne Frank, but that she was Anne Frank. And I'd mentioned the reason Anne Frank is so famous is because she wrote a book that was very readable, dealt with universal themes like the nature of man, good and evil, and so forth. And that's the reason the book became an international bestseller. And scholars have always wondered, how could this teenage girl write such sophisticated prose? And that led to Anne Frank being the most famous victim of the Holocaust. Well, Barbara did the same thing as Anne Frank. Barbara was a childhood writing prodigy, just like Anne Frank. Her first book was here, it's called Man on Earth. Can't really see it too well, but Man on Earth became the best-selling prose book in Swedish history. And she became a little celebrity doing, kind of panel discussions with priests and stuff about the nature of man. And she had 9 books published in her, by the time she was 19, and became, again, like a celebrity in Europe. And here's a picture of Booty Elias, the cousin and president of the Anne Frank Foundation, who I said supports Barbara. And here they are together in Basel, Switzerland. And like I said, they're best friends, though Booty has passed away. Okay, why don't we, I think that's all on this case. Okay. Oh, and also, if you have time, down at the bottom, this is a video of Barbara telling her own story. And, I've done many presentations with Barbara in the past. And when she would tell her story about being Anne Frank, oftentimes she would start to cry. And then I started to feel bad about putting her through this. So I decided to get, somebody to videotape her, and it came out really well. And in this, there's 2 versions. There's a 35-minute version on top and a 10-minute version on the bottom. It's just edited, but it's very worthwhile viewing. We could view it now if you want, or do you want me to do other cases?
I think we can go back and watch this ourselves.
Right. Okay. So
Better
let me
to
keep
have
going.
your insight into things that we wouldn't be so likely to see.
Okay. All right, so the next category is planning lifetimes. And these are all cases where, remember I said how in the twin study, people plan their lifetimes to be reunited in the next incarnation. These are all different cases that show this phenomenon, and there's quite a few. And maybe I'll just let people review it on their own. So there is one case that
We did have James Leininger's father here for a weekend, and he
okay, so I'll skip that one.
told us all about his son.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let me just share two cases here, and then we can kind of move on. So I had mentioned that when you do change gender, you can have gender identity issues or homosexuality. And this case is also quite phenomenal. It's when a Japanese soldier reincarnated as a woman, but retained the mindset of the male Japanese soldier, and eventually, married a woman. I'm sorry, married a woman. So this Japanese soldier became a lesbian through gender change. So this occurs in Burma during World War II. And the Japanese occupied Burma, and they committed many atrocities. And so in general, the Burmese people hated the Japanese. Well, in this one town, where there was a Japanese cook assigned. The Japanese were there in this village in particular because the railroad went through there. And he became friends with a Burmese woman who also cooked. And so they would share recipes and cooking techniques, and became buddies. Well, one day, American fighters were strafing that village because the Japanese were there. And in a strafing run, the Japanese cook was shot in the groin and bled out. He died. Not long after that, the woman that the Japanese soldier became friends with got pregnant, had a baby girl, and the baby girl had a birthmark right at the spot of where the Japanese soldier was shot in the groin. Growing up, the girl whose name was Ma, when Ma was growing up, she had a strong phobia of aircraft, which goes back to the Japanese soldier being shot by one. And Ma would say that she missed Japan and her family, that she missed her children, and she wanted to go back to Japan. Well, to all the Burmese villagers, this was like crazy, and they would joke around and call her the Japanese guy, or so this was totally out of character for somebody who lived in Burma to have this affinity for Japan. Ma had then past life memories of being shot, and there were other factors. Ma, even though she was a man, I'm sorry, a woman, she insisted on dressing like a man. And she got in trouble at school because they wanted men to dress as men and women as women. And she almost got kicked out of school because she insisted on wearing men's clothing. And as I mentioned before, when she grew up, she ended up being attracted to a woman, which would have been natural for the Japanese soldier, but caused kind of a unusual result through reincarnation. So from a psychological point of view, I think understanding these sorts of issues will be helpful for us to be in understanding homosexuality. Though in my work with Kevin, not all people who are homosexual, that condition or state was not necessarily caused by a change in gender. There are people or souls who just prefer a particular way of being, whether it be heterosexual, homosexual, or whatever. So there's actually, Atun Reyes said, there's a number of different genders, not just two. Okay, now we get to the big one, change of religion, nationality, and race. There's quite a few cases that show this. We've already gone through the Anne Frank case, but at your leisure, you can review some of the many others. Let me kind of skip ahead here to see at the bottom here, it says spirit beings in reincarnation cases. One thing that we see in reincarnation cases that spirit beings are coordinating discovery of these cases. And as an example, I'll use the case of Jeff Keane, John B. Gordon, Jeff Keane. And Jeff's case powerfully shows physical resemblance from one lifetime to another. Jeff, the way this started is so Jeff's case started when he and his wife went on vacation looking for antiques. Jeff is retired now, but he was an assistant fire chief for Westport, Connecticut. And he had no interest in reincarnation or anything like this. But when he was with his wife, antique hunting in a town called Sharpsville, Maryland, Jeff realized that there was a Civil War battlefield very close to that town. And so he and his wife went to just kind of take a self-guided tour of the battlefield. And they came to a place called Sunken Road. And Jeff turned on one of these audio tape narration things that they have, these historical places. And after he listened to it, he had this flood of emotions, which he said he had never had before. And he felt like crying. In fact, he did start to cry. He kind of lost all track of time. He kind of went into kind of a trance state. And then once he got out of it, he just went back to the car. He didn't tell his wife anything about this. Went back to back in town. He bought a souvenir magazine on Antietam, and then they went home. Well, about a year and a half later, he and his wife went to a party where they had hired a psychic for entertainment or enlightenment. And so when his turn came to see the psychic, he asked her, well, what happened to me at Antietam at Sunken Road? And the psychic said, you were all shot up. In a past lifetime, you were in the battle there. You were all shot up. You were laying on the ground. It looked like you were getting ready to die, and that was the information that he was given. Jeff then went back to the souvenir magazine that he had bought. He had not read it yet. It just sat in her kitchen drawer for a while. And so he got the magazine out and started to read it. And there was a passage. Oh, when he was seeing the psychic said, and you kept saying something like, not now, not now. And then Jeff blurted out, not yet, not yet. And he didn't know why he said that. And so when he was reading this magazine, he read that there was this Confederate general named John B. Gordon, who was leading the troops there in this Sunken Road area. And the Yankees were approaching, and this John B. Gordon kept yelling, not yet, not yet, because he didn't want his guys to fire until the Yankees were very close by. And, that struck Jeff, because that's what he blurted out, with the psychic. And then he turned the page and found a portrait of Gordon, and the resemblance is really quite stunning. And in addition to physical resemblance, it turns out that Gordon wrote a book about the Civil War called, called Reminiscences of the Civil War. And Jeff read it and realized, Gordon's writing style seemed to be exactly like his writing style. And Jeff even sent me, a passage from Gordon's book, and something that he had wrote to his supervisor. And when I read them, it just seemed like it's in the same voice. I mean, it did seem to me like it was the same writing style, but I'm not a linguist. So what I did is I actually hired a linguist at the University of California at Berkeley, and the linguist compared the two passages and concluded that the linguistic writing style of Gordon and Keene are the same. So, kind of what we're building up here, again, is that idea that, we're the same person from one lifetime to another. And this can even extend to your writing style. So we've seen how talent can be the same, facial features can be the same. And the other thing we've mentioned is that people come back together in groups. So all these are ways to assess reincarnation cases. Is there physical resemblance? Are there similar talents? Is there an appropriate karmic grouping? So these are different tools we can use to assess reincarnation cases. Also, I'd like to now discuss a suicide case. So there are about a dozen, I would say, suicide cases that Stevenson has. So these are cases where somebody committed suicide in the past lifetime, but they reincarnate. And you know, I grew up Catholic, and you know, you're kind of taught that um, you know, people who commit suicide go to purgatory or hell or somewhere like that, but that's not true. They reincarnate like everybody else, and they just get another try, you know, to work out whatever they need to work out. Let me just point out one other phenomenon, which I call split incarnation. So the evidence shows that one soul can actually animate more than one body at a time. So you can have sort of a double. And a case that demonstrates this is a suicide case. This involves a man named Rupert Schultz, who remembered a past lifetime in which he committed suicide. And he remembered that he was uh, like a city official, that he had a timber or lumber business. He would import timber from other places and then turn it into useful lumber. And what happened is that this lumber guy, later we'll learn that his name was Helmut Kohler. This lumber guy had speculated on timber, speculated the wrong way, and basically lost all his money. And then later his accountant left and took money too. So he was in bad straits, and he remembered coming back from a ceremony, a city ceremony. He had a top hat, came back to his dwelling, went to a back room where he had a safe, and took a revolver and killed himself. Rupert Schultz was born in 1887 in Berlin, and he had this tendency that whenever he would get down or depressed, he would say, he would like make a gun shaped to his head and say, "I shoot myself." And he did this multiple times to the point where his mother said, "Stop it," because it was freaking her out. Rupert had a natural talent for business. He set up a couple businesses and became quite wealthy. He had a similar setup in his home with a safe and kind of a dark room. And whenever he would go in there, he would have deja vu that, you know, I've been in this kind of room before. You know, he had a vision committing suicide while fully awake. And what he did is he wrote, he knew in his past lifetime, he lived on a body of water. There was a port, you know, where his timber would come in. And so he thought this has to be in North Germany on the Baltic Sea. And there was only one town really that would be suitable for this timber industry. And so Rupert wrote to the mayor of that town and explained that he remembered being a businessman, somebody in government who killed himself with a revolver. And the people at this town said, "Well, yeah, actually there is one person who fits it, and it's this Helmut Kohler." So it turned out that that Helmut Kohler had a surviving son. And so Rupert actually got a hold of the son and went to visit him. And in photographs, Rupert, the son would show him family photographs, and Rupert was able to identify them by name, even though he had no knowledge of these people in his contemporary lifetime. To kind of a replication, even though he became wealthy, Rupert became wealthy, he lost everything, just like Helmut did. But this time, everything was lost because of World War II and the bombing of Germany. So what's very interesting about this case is that Rupert was born 6 weeks before Helmut committed suicide. So if you accept this case, and I think it's a very strong case, that means the soul is projecting itself into the adult Helmut, who's still alive prior to surgery, prior to committing suicide. And at the same time, the soul is projecting itself into Rupert's fetus. You see what I mean? So I think let's see if there's anything else I need to cover. Oh, then let me just finally show you this tab. So down here we have celebrity reincarnation cases. And these are the ones that I've derived through Kevin Ryerson. So recall that initially I sought out Kevin to help me sort out proposed reincarnation cases. Well, in working with Kevin and Atun Ray, I found over time that Atun Ray could make past life matches with a high degree of accuracy. And once I figured that out, I went to town trying to get, past lives for contemporary people and present lives for, people who had died in the past. Oh, I was going to do celebrity. So here's the celebrity cases. The first tab is how they were derived. So there's a tab on my work with Kevin, and then here's a little summary of my proposed past life as John Adams, as well as one for Shirley MacLaine. The next tab are core cases, which I use to show why I believe that Atun Ray has the ability to make accurate past life matches. And one case I think everybody will enjoy is Laurel and Hardy. It's a phenomenal case. Also, we have a past lifetime for Michael Jackson. Also for Marianne Williamson, she's identified as Abigail Adams. And she agreed to be in my book as Abigail Adams. So these are 5 or 6 cases that I think are pretty compelling. And then we have all the different categories of celebrity cases. So people who were in art and design, business, exploration, literature, movies, medicine, military, careers, music, politics and law, science and spirituality, and sports. So we have reincarnation cases for all these categories that have been derived through me and Kevin and Atun Ray, and there's quite a few. So you can have fun with that. Okay, maybe we could do questions now.
Yes, if you have questions, put them on the chat pad and I will read them to Walter. First, Walter, before we get started with that, I wanted to mention that on our website, we have the story of Carlos Nakai. Are you familiar with who he is? He's
I'm sorry.
the best known Native American flute player.
Oh yeah, no, I don't know that person.
He has dozens of CDs out, and I was fortunate to spend time with him in Nova Scotia one summer for a couple of weeks, and talked to him at length. And he told me his story, his reincarnation story. He was an SS officer in World War II, lived in Germany, and he tours all over the world now as a Native American flute player. And when he got off of the train in a little town in Germany, he recognized the city. He knew where everything was.
Oh,
It's a
wow.
very, very strong story. And the story is on our website. I'm sure you'd be interested to see it, Walter, and you might be interested to talk to RC at some point. His name
Okay.
is R. Carlos Nakai, but he goes by RC. And the story on our website, it says a Native American story. It doesn't say his last name because
Mhm.
he wasn't too keen at the time. This was quite a while ago, and he wasn't too keen about having people know that he was an SS officer in World War II.
Did
So
he ever find out specifically who he was, or no?
I'm not sure. I'm
Oh,
not sure.
okay.
But there's quite a lot of information about it on our website.
Okay.
So anyway, questions. How about animals? I had a puppy who died and reincarnated as my next puppy.
Yeah, that happens. So my understanding, and again, I kind of make a point that some things we can conclude based on evidence, like the Stevenson cases. But there's other things like what's the purpose of reincarnation? When does it end? That we can't derive from the evidence. So that's when I use my sessions with Kevin and Atun Ray to get clarification. And so, the whole issue of animals and animal reincarnation is an issue. And what Atun Ray has explained is that wild animals don't have an individual soul. They have sort of a group soul. Um, but when an animal becomes a pet and develops an emotional relationship with a person, then that animal does individuate and has like its own little animal soul. And then that animal, based on attraction, this kind of goes back to that twin study where, people plan their lifetime. So in your case, I bet your dog, in the spirit world, learned that he could plan to be with you again and did. So yeah, that does happen. The other issue is, do people incarnate as animals? And the answer from Atun Ray is no. I mean, you incarnate to develop, and once you're human, reincarnating as a mouse is not going to get you much. So humans reincarnate as humans, animals reincarnate as animals.
Yeah, one of the questions was, what do you feel is the point of living multiple lifetimes? And lessons, I think, is what you just said, and I feel that feels very resonant and very accurate.
Yeah, and I can elaborate on that. Atun Ray has. Well, I asked Atun Ray, when does reincarnation stop? And it's based on just a few things. One, you need to develop your natural talents to a sufficient level. When we're created as souls, we're all created with different abilities. So when artists come back as artists, that's because that's in the template of your soul. So somebody could be created with an artistic predisposition, and while another person could be born with a military predisposition. Well, so the path of evolution of those two people is going to be very different. I used to think to finish evolution, I'm going to have to become a Buddhist monk in Tibet, but that's not the case. The people who become spiritual types, that's their particular talent. So the people who become, the monks and the Dalai Lamas and all those folks, that's their gift or a tendency that they're endowed with. Okay, so one itinerary says is you have to get good at what you've been blessed with. So let's say you put that way. Secondly, you have to develop an all-encompassing love of humanity, and generally that involves doing something to help humanity in one way or the other. And then he said you have to learn to live with joy. So it's not that complicated, but it takes about 100 lifetimes to get there. Oh, and then also you have to clear out the karma that you have accumulated, in prior incarnations.
Right.
See, life
Wonderful.
isn't that complicated at all.
Right.
Once you learn.
Myron asks if you could explain the reasons for suicide.
Well, I think the vast majority is just clinical biologic depression. So it's estimated that 20% or so of the population does experience some form of depression in their lives. But biologic depression, I compare it to like diabetes. A lot of people don't want to take antidepressants when they're depressed, because there's kind of a stigma, but they're crucial. So I think the vast majority of suicides are untreated depression, or depression that's treated and just not treated effectively enough, or people just kind of give up. I mean, unless you walk in their moccasins, it's hard to know what happened. But like Robin Williams, I think he just got desperate that he was, he had a long history of depression, and I think he was just tired of dealing with it. And life's no fun if you're depressed. I mean, I have biologic depression. I take antidepressants, and if I don't, I get suicidal, even though there's nothing for me to be suicidal about. Everything can be going along perfectly in my life, and I can get a severe depression for no reason, and what treats it is antidepressants. So I think that's 99% of what happens.
One of the things I learned on the other side is that there is no one way to do anything. So that every person's path is unique. And I believe that some people come and they come to experience suicide, and they do that and experience what it does to themselves and the people around them just for that experience. But other people, for different reasons, I don't think there's any one reason why people commit suicide.
That's true.
Um, Someone asks if you know about the book, the re- re-
I'm sorry, you great.
reincarnation of Edgar Casey,
Oh, yeah. So
and supposedly the reincarnation. What do you know about David
about
Wilcock?
what? Wilco, yeah, okay. So let's just put in here David Wilcock.
Mhm.
So David was not Casey. He was Casey's biographer, whose name was Thomas Segru. And I was actually involved with David's case all the way back in the beginning. And what happened, he was living in Virginia and hanging around at the ARE, and he became friends with a fellow named Joseph Myers, who was a professional engineer, but he was very active in the ARE in Virginia. And he sort of got enamored with David and his claim to be Casey, and he even let David stay at his home for a couple months, where he could write and all that. But in the end, uh, Myers was, Myers has passed away by now, but I used to know Joseph Myers, and he called me about David and said, it looks like he may be uh, the reincarnation of Casey. And so I actually one afternoon spent about 5 hours on the phone with David, trying to learn about him and his claim to be Casey. And both, Joseph Myers and I came to the conclusion that he's not Casey. He was probably somebody around Casey, but he wasn't Casey. And I told this to David way back when. Let me fast forward. And then in a session with Kevin Ryerson, I asked about David, and Atunray said no, he was not Casey, but he was Casey's biographer named Thomas Segru. So plain and simple. And and I told David that, and we've talked about these different principles of reincarnation. Well, um, Edgar Casey was a medium. He was not an author. He never wrote a book. He wrote very little, actually. Uh, he was not an intellectual, whereas David is like the complete opposite. He's an aggressive intellectual. He writes a lot. He's got a number of books out. That is totally inconsistent with who Casey was. So, we have Atunray's input, but also his presentation makes no case. He doesn't meet these principles of reincarnation, but he did know Casey, which is why there's that affinity, and he mixed up knowing Casey to being Casey. And that happens a lot, and that's why there are so many people who think they were somebody famous. Maybe they were, but more often than not, they knew the famous person, and in through their own intuitions or dreams or whatever, they make the mistake of thinking that they were the famous person rather than being an associate of the famous person.
Robert wants to know if what other founding fathers reincarnated with you in your family. Are they involved in politics today? Anybody else in your family?
No, and actually, let me just kind of point this out, because at first glance, it doesn't seem consistent. Let's say that John Adams was a lawyer and politician, and I'm a medical doctor. Seems like two different worlds, and they are. But what John Adams did and what I'm trying to do are basically the same thing. So Adams in the American Revolution was part of the group who helped bring democracy to the United States and take power away from the political monarchies and give it to the people. Well, you know, probably picked up on the theme here today that, you know, I'm not a big fan of organized religions because they do create conflict, and also because I think most of them don't really know what they're talking about. And let's see, so my point is that what evidence of reincarnation is going to do is it's going to take power away from the religious monarchies, the traditional religions, and shift it to the individual. Because through evidence of reincarnation, people are going to realize that these traditional religions don't really know what they're talking about. They don't include reincarnation. And so kind of like my purpose is to take the power away from the religious monarchies and kind of level the playing field, that, you know, we're all equal, we're all, you know, human beings progressing, and let's not fight over these cultural markers of identity.
Right. And superficial things like skin color.
Right, right,
Details.
right, exactly.
Um, uh, Sharon Rukan recommends listening to Manly Hall's lectures on reincarnation. Do you have anything to say about those?
Well, I used to review some of Manly Hall's writings, but, you know, that was probably 20 years ago. I don't remember much.
Grace thanks you, and she'd be curious to know if Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, and Mao Zedong have reincarnated, and as who, since they were cast as political leaders and despots.
Yes, I don't know of any incarnations of those people. So
Greg,
usually, you know, yeah, I've asked Hatun Ray, you know, about is Hitler incarnate or gonna incarnate soon? And he said no, Hitler's not going to be back for a long time. You know, basically when you die, you go through a review process of your life. So Hitler is going to and also a review of what you've done to others. And in this past life review that you do in the spirit world, you actually feel the emotions of the other people. So if you got in an argument with somebody and, you know, called them bad names and all that, in your past life review, you will experience what those words did to the person that you were arguing with. So Hitler's going to have to review a lot of, you know, the death that he caused, and he's not going to be back for a while. But Atun Ray has said that everybody has to graduate. You know, it's Hitler is going to have to come back, and he eventually is going to have to transcend, you know, where he doesn't have to reincarnate anymore. But that's going to be many lifetimes in the future.
right. Craig says Donald Trump seems to me to be someone who hasn't learned the lessons in prior lifetimes. Has anyone looked into possible past lives for Donald Trump?
So this is where the search bar is very useful. If you have any curiosity,
Use the search bar.
yeah, use a search bar. So here's Trump. So Trump has been identified as the reincarnation of Nero, the Roman emperor, who was known for his narcissism. And also Nero loved gold. You know, he built a palace that had a lot of gold in it. And in fact, they called it the Golden Home. And, you know, Trump loves gold, and his Trump Tower has got lots of gold furnishings. So there was that picture. Here's another one. Yeah, and if you read this article, it turns out that Ivanka and Melania were both in the Nero family. Melania was his sister. And it's interesting, they do seem to have kind of a brother-sister relationship, you know, they don't seem too affectionate. And Ivanka was one of the wives of Nero. And then, you know, everybody's wondered about the affinity that Trump has had for Putin. Well, it turns out, oh, this page got screwed up somehow. I'm gonna have to go back and fix this. But Vladimir Putin has been identified as the reincarnation of Julius Caesar, which can explain why Trump and Putin would have this affinity. Caesar lived before Nero, and Nero was a big fan of Caesar. And so this may be why Trump and Putin have appeared cozy.
Wow, that's very interesting.
Yep. And Putin is basically, you know, kind of trying to relive the life of Caesar and just staying in power as much as he can, changing all the laws to keep himself in power. So, you know, things repeat.
Yep, they do. How do you clear out past karma? Marianne wants to know.
Well, I think it's pretty much automatic. You know, life is going to steer you into situations where you do that. A good example for me is in my story. I've been married twice. My ex-wife is identified in my book, Return of the Revolutionaries, as one of the sons of John Adams. And Adams and the son had a terrible relationship, and Adams ended up kind of disowning him. And so that relationship, an attempt was made to heal that relationship through marriage. And, you know, I'd mentioned before, you know, planning lifetimes, you know, people who were spouses can incarnate as twins, so siblings. So through reincarnation, you reincarnate with many of the people you've known before, but the type of relationship can change. And so that's one way, is just through personal relationships. And you know, that's also how I explain love at first sight. You know, when you meet somebody and you know you're going to marry this person the first time you meet, that's a past life relationship.
Yeah.
So, or you may have had issues with a employer, and you know, in the next lifetime, you may end up being the employer, and your past life employer could work under you, you know, to again kind of equalize these things. And actually, oh, you even mentioned, well, if you want to know about really the relationships, the people who have reincarnated from the American Revolution, then Return of the Revolutionaries is a book you might want to read. But another way karma, well, in my example, remember I said I worked for Unocal, the oil company? Well, a number of people in the medical department at Unocal were all kind of past life family members or associates. and a number of them are identified in that book. Yeah, so employment is another place where you can reconnect and try to heal things.
Yeah. Myron wonders whether if there was any specific religion, or is there really no right religion?
I would say there's no real right religion. I mean, Hinduism comes closest because they're very fervent about reincarnation, but they say that you can reincarnate as an animal, which is not true, and they it incorporates the caste system, which is not true. uh, and so there's some falsehood in Hinduism. Buddhism talks about reincarnation, but Buddhism doesn't have a clear understanding of how reincarnation works. I mean, they also say you can reincarnate as an animal. The Dalai Lama says he doesn't step on insects because he could be an insect next time around. And they don't have a real, like what I'm presenting to you is how reincarnation works based on evidence. They have none of that. It's all kind of like this theoretic stuff. Um, so I would say there's no one religion that's got it all right. And, we're kind of starting from scratch, I guess, to building a new, not religion really, but just a understanding that, we evolve through reincarnation and that's the way it works. And don't get too attached to any one religion.
Right. In your death experiencer, Howard Storm had an opportunity to ask Jesus questions for a long extended period on the other side. And one of the questions he asked was, what is the best religion, expecting something like Methodist or whatever. And Jesus replied to him, the best religion is the one that brings you closest to God,
That's a good answer.
which I think is a great answer.
Yeah.
Uh, um, Craig says you stated that it will be a long time before Hitler comes back. Are you also saying that a soul like Hitler may have to reincarnate many times before he stops wreaking havoc and death?
Not necessarily. Hitler, if you review his history, um, the way that what happened is, Hitler was in World War I as a soldier, and the Germans, were losing the war, and so they had to do a peace treaty. And the peace treaty was very disadvantageous to Germany. And Hitler was very dismayed about that. And he blamed it on Jewish German officials. So he felt that the peace deal that was negotiated by Germany's heads of state was a big mistake. It sort of eliminated the possible gains that Germany made through war. Basically, Germany was kind of castrated, in this peace deal, and that is apparently where Hitler got his hatred of the Jewish people. Well, you can imagine, and remember when Hitler was a young man, he wanted to be an artist, and he even went. Now, I think he applied to art school and was rejected, which maybe also made him an angry person. But you can imagine if Hitler incarnates in another era, he may just pursue art. And because he does have, Hitler had a very charismatic speaking style, he can also get involved in politics again, but this time on the good side, and through his charismatic personality can raise awareness for good thing like global warming or whatever. So you could use a faculty that you have for either good or bad.
Mhm.
And the hope is that after Hitler goes through his process of past life review and experiences the death and pain and horror that he caused, then in another incarnation, just like people have phobias from past lifetimes, I would think Hitler might have a phobia about military conquest because of what he's had to experience in the past life review.
Great. One quick last one. Mary wants to know if we had a difficult relationship with someone in our current lives, then if we forgive them in this life, does that mean that we probably won't reincarnate with them in a subsequent life?
Wait, say that again?
If we had a difficult relationship with someone in our current life, and then we forgive them, does that
Mhm.
mean that we won't have them in the future? Are we done with them?
Yes, that's a it's a very good strategy, and yeah, if you practice forgiveness, then you're going to be karma free.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much. Walter, it was such a pleasure to have you here and to get to hear some of your stories. And I'm sure people will be referring back to your site and learning more.
Yeah, so
Uh,
my email, it's just walter@reincarnationresearch.com. And please tell your friends about the site, and we can create a new revolution.
yes, absolutely. I'm all for it.
Well, thank you for spending so much time with me, and uh, your good questions. And we're all on the same team, so let's go get them.
Okay, I want to just briefly say that we had about 40 to 45 people here today, and we've received two donations so far. I hope that the rest of you plan on contributing something to help our efforts because we aren't taking in as much as usual and we still have ongoing expenses. So
And
please,
we have a donation page too. And
so yes,
yeah, the money that we raise primarily I use for Facebook advertising, to get the word out.
yes, that's really important to do that too. So hopefully you'll donate something to our cause. And also I wanted to mention that our speaker next month is Ray Hernandez, who's an UFO and other related topic specialist. And he's had a lot of very personal experiences. Beings from the other side have been in his home and his family has seen them and interacted. It's very interesting. I'm sure there's a lot of people who will enjoy that as well. So thanks to everybody for coming, and we look
And
forward to seeing
and
you
have
next.
have an Italian beef and a hot dog for me.
Yes, there you go.
Okay. All right. Thanks you. Bye
Take
bye.